we can learn from it. So today we are here to talk about navigating the relationship of board and management. It's a very interesting topic. It's a soft issue because many people would rather look at, what are the rules? What does the law say? What do the regulations say? What do the company policies say? But something that is somehow underlooked is how are you nurturing that relationship? Because it's through those relationships that discussions with the board are made either easier or more difficult. And today we have a number of experts in corporate governance and leadership who are just going to give us insights and tips on how we can nurture that relationship and make it better for better effectiveness of the board. We're going to start with a keynote address by Christabel Mikel. Christabel will start off with a keynote address, and that will be followed by the panelists who I'll later introduce. Just to briefly give you a few insights about Christabel, she's a co-founder of Best Life Insurance Limited. And prior to that, she served as a managing director of ZSIC Life PLC and the chief finance officer of Diamond General Insurance, and later as the CEO. She's a transformational business executive, a fellow of the Insurance Institute of Zambia, and a fellow of the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants. She's also currently a certified trainer of the Institute of Directors, and she's currently studying towards a doctorate in business administration. There you have it, Christabel, you're very welcome, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stella, and good morning. Good morning to our participants, to my fellow panelists, good morning. And I want to start by just thanking Leading Board Africa for the work that you're doing. And I must say it's always an honor to participate in these sessions of yours, and I always find them very helpful. So thank you very much for inviting me once again to speak to you. And to the participants, today is a very interesting topic. I think, like we heard from Stella, it's a soft issue in terms of managing that delicate relationship between the board and management. And I thought I could just share with you some of my experiences over the years. I have been privileged to have corporate governance experience. I think in total, in terms of my work experience, I've got about 25 years worth of work experience, and 16 years of those I've been privileged to have experience in corporate governance, because that's when I entered the C-suite and started serving the board. And I've served in various capacities. I've been on the receiving end and also on the giving end. I have been a board chairperson. I've served as a non-executive director on different boards. So I thought I could just share with you some of my experiences. So as the topic indicates, I would have wanted to share a slide, but I think the last time our technology didn't really help us. So I thought I could stay away from that and just have a discussion instead. So navigating this board management relationship can be something that really would help an organization to take. Obviously, if there's a healthy relationship between the board and management, that is the ultimate goal. That's where we want to go. So as we know, corporate governance is a key aspect in terms of managing institutions. Corporate governance is just a whole systems of how organizations are managed. And as we look at corporate governance, obviously we in the modern trends now, we've seen that a number of institutions are actually implementing these tenets of good corporate governance, because if organizations are managed properly, the whole corporate governance structure is in place. We have seen that there's been a lot of growth. Companies that are run properly are able to attract capital. Companies that are run properly are looked at as a key stakeholder in an economy. And so what we all want is to get to that sweet spot where the corporate governance systems are working for an institution. And the key aspect of that is that we get, if you look at corporate governance, you're looking at the board, you're looking at management, you're looking at the shareholders, and all these have specific roles to play in ensuring that the organization moves forward. And so when you look at the relationship between the board and and management, we have to understand what are the roles of the board, what are the roles of management, because mostly what causes a friction is a lack of understanding of the roles of these two key stakeholders in the governance map. So when a board is effective, you will note that the performance. So when we're looking at board effectiveness, we are looking at the whole board being effective. Individually, as board members, the members of that board will be effective. They will contribute positively to the development of the organization. There's that collective responsibility when decisions are made. There's no finger pointing. There's collective ownership in the decisions that the organization is making. And also management, when the relationship with the board, when these dynamics are working properly, you will find that even for management, they feel comfortable to take their issues to the board. They feel comfortable even when it's time to report results that are not favorable, because they know that the board's role will be to provide guidance and to provide insight. So where there is a good working relationship between the board and management, you'll find that both the board and management will understand their roles. They know the role that they have to play. Obviously, the board is oversight, and management will be implementing. You will find that both the board and management understand the aspirations of the organizations. The organization's mission is understood by both parties. The organization's vision, the strategic plan for the organization would be understood by both parties. Both parties will be able to bring to bear their expertise in this relationship. So you find that you get board members, the non-executive board members will bring to bear their expertise, their experiences to the board in the discharge of their mandate, and management will also be in a position to take to the board their issues in a manner that is transparent and open. Even in terms of implementing operational plans, coming up with a strategic plan of the organization, the board and management will play to each other's strengths, and the expectations on both sides will be known. So obviously that is the ideal situation. That is where we want to go. But what exactly happens? What do we see in most cases? In reality, what are we seeing? We are seeing situations where there's sometimes perceived interference from the board. So management will be thinking that the board is interfering in their operations. And the board's role, as you know, is oversight. The board's role is nose in, fingers out, as they say. But in a situation where you find that the board is interfering interfering in operations, there will be strained relationship. And sometimes the interference can actually be perceived. A board might want, especially now, the board's role is evolving, because gone are the days where boards will just be there, they're meeting quarterly, they don't really have much input into the strategies of the organization. This time, a lot of boards are quite active. And so that activism, the activist board might be perceived by management as overreaching, as interfering in operations. Sometimes this could be true, but sometimes it's also a perception. So you find that from management's view, they'll be thinking that the board is entering in their space, where they are asking details that originally are supposed to be operational details when they get into the board. But from the board's perspective, they'll be thinking that maybe they are doing this so that they can have better insights into the operations, that they provide better guidance. So there will be that conflict sometimes. But I have seen, I think, in some institutions, genuinely, where you get a board that is interfering in the operations of management. We had instances here where a board chairperson was even asking to be given a desk in an institution so that they could start looking at certain reports because they were not clear in the board. So you get something like that. But of course, how that can be cured is just to ensure that from the onset, the role of the board and the role of management is understood by both parties. We cannot have any member of the board going to sit in an institution even if it means they're trying to understand, because that understanding is supposed to happen in the boardroom through the regulated channels that the organization has set in its board charters, in the governance charters. That's where that role is supposed to be defined. Sometimes you find that management also would be hesitant to make decisions. Okay, they'll be hesitant to make decisions because every time that they take a decision to the board, there's mistrust. Okay, when management takes information to the board starts tearing it apart. Of course, the board is allowed to interrogate. The board is allowed, it's within its mandate to interrogate, to question management, and to exercise professional skepticism, as they call it. But you find that in some instances where the relationship has broken down, instead of the skepticism being healthy, it borders on actually total mistrust, where every time a management brings something to the board would rather believe an external person than whatever management submits. So where you find something like that, I think then definitely something has to be done. There's a total breakdown of the relationship where there is complete mistrust. And in some incidences, you get a management team that is failing to make decisions. The board asks for something, instead of taking to the board maybe three, four items, and then giving their recommendation, because that is what management is supposed to do. You are entrusted with the day-to-day running of your organization. But I have come across a situation where instead of management doing their part, after they do the analysis, they do the work, and then when they submit to the board, instead of actually coming out with their proposal to the board by shortlisting whatever issues that the board is trying to make a decision on, and then making a recommendation to assist the board, you find they just take maybe 5, 10, these are the items, and then they're expecting the board to be the ones to decide and make a decision. So where you get a management that is hesitant to make decisions, sometimes that also creates that problem when it comes to the board and board management relations. Sometimes you get management delegating upwards to the board, where issues that are supposed to be operational in nature are being taken to the board for decision making. So that also strains the relationship. In some instances, you find the board wants so much detail when they're trying to make a decision on something, they're asking management to produce manuals, which obviously they might not even be able to read. They spend too much time looking at minor issues that have nothing of strategic significance to the institution. So those are some of the things that you see as symptoms of the relationship breaking down. Sometimes you find downright undermining management by the board, where whatever management comes up with, some of the board members think that for you to show that you are a good board member, you have to challenge even something that has been properly researched, because you think that when you're for you to be a tough board member or to add value, you need to show that you've got a strong position on ABCD. So that also tends to derail an institution, and management becomes defensive all the time. So the boardroom becomes a battlefield, as opposed to these two stakeholders, the board and management. Instead of them working together, you find the boardroom now becomes a battlefield, and different dynamics are happening there. People start now meeting outside the boardroom to discuss things that are supposed to be done in the boardroom. The board management relationship, when it's moving smoothly, you find that even when an organization faces a crisis, it will be better prepared to handle the crisis because the internal systems are working. Management is able to come to the board even for issues where there was a miscalculation and things didn't turn out the way that they were supposed to. They are able to go to the board to express or present whatever negative effects of the decision that management made, whatever repercussions. They are able to go to the board because they will be operating with trust, and they will not fear that that the board is not going to support them. And so when this relationship breaks down, an institution obviously suffers, because whatever decisions that will be made will be suboptimal, and in some instances the board will not be given all the information, especially if the board comes out aggressively and they do not want to receive good news, because unfortunately, as a business operates or an organization runs, there will be both good news and bad news to be shared in the boardroom. And so there has to be a safe space created by the board. And that is where you see that the role of the chairman is also critical, or chairperson is critical, in ensuring that this relationship is smooth, and making sure that the dynamics in the boardroom, the dynamics amongst the board members and the relationship with the CEO is operating smoothly. I think the chair has a key role to play. Where you get a board which is very passive, in some cases, that would be a favorite a board for management, especially in state-owned institutions, because when a board is passive, management will just they'll be able to take whatever management gives them. And from management's perspective, they'll be looking at that board as being very cooperative supporters. So this is also an area that we also need to look at. Sometimes, the relationship is supposed to be good, yes, but you may find that when a board also is not exercising its role, it's being passive, it might be perceived as a very good board to management. But what happens then is that the institution suffers, because the board is always endorsing what management is saying. They are not challenging management. They are not taking them to account and bringing their expertise to bear, because obviously the board is selected based on their expertise, their competencies, and we are assuming that issues of diversity are also taken into consideration. So we want the board to play its role, its oversight role. Where the board members are empowered custodians, for instance, management will consider them as uninformed meddlers, as they call it. This is the a study that was done by the Harvard Business School in terms of the two sides of the coin, where management is thinking that the board is very supportive. On one hand, you find that board is actually passive. Where they are empowered, management sometimes might think they are uninformed and they are meddling. And where they are engaged collaborators, then that is a sweet spot that we want, because when they are engaged and they are collaborators, as a board, management will find them very helpful partners, because that is what we are trying to that's the sweet spot we are trying to get at, where the management feels comfortable and feels that the board is there for them, to support them in the execution of the mandate. Because remember, the two sides are playing on the same team. And so there's no, once the two sides are not moving in tandem, what suffers obviously is the organization. So what are some of the things that we can do to try and fuel or to try and improve the relationship between the board and management? I think the key thing is to ensure that the roles are clearly understood. What is the board there to do? What is the role of management? When these two roles are understood properly, you will see that each of these two factors will be playing in their lane. And of course, once in a while, you might find that there's a bit of overlap sometimes when there's an execution of the mandate, but if these roles are clearly defined, it will be very easy to each of the two to go back to their lanes. Also, there's need for open communication. Okay, so if communication has to flow amongst the board members themselves, there has to be healthy communication. There shouldn't be some pockets of board members that have different information, another group. And so the role of the chair here is very important to make sure that there's good communication amongst the board members. The same thing, the CEO needs to make sure that there's good communication in the management team. And so when the two come together, the information should be able to flow. So there has to be open communication. There has to be trust and respect. Because remember, these are two groups of professionals that come together. And in some instances, you find that maybe the management team is actually even more in terms of maybe education and experience, sometimes even in terms of age. They might even be older, they might be more experienced than the board members in some instances, especially specifically in the field that the entity is in. And so the board needs to have that respect for management, and equally management also has to respect the board, because all the ones that are entrusted with the oversight of the institution. So there has to be that trust and respect. The board, even if they have to exercise that professional skepticism, they have to do that within an environment of trust and respect. Because once trust is broken, because there are if the board is suspicious that maybe management is hiding something, there are a number of tools that are available to the board to be able to get the information that they want. There is no need for the board to start skipping the CEO and going to the juniors to try and get that information, because there are tools that are available for the board, for them to be able to get the information. If it's an issue of suspecting maybe a breach of controls, etc., and that's why we have internal audit that reports to the audit committee. If there's any area that the board feels needs to be looked at, I think that there are tools that the board can put into play if they are suspecting something. So there's no need to bring that mistrust to the boardroom and create an environment where now management fears to bring especially bad news to the board, because for an organization to progress, both good news and bad news should be able to be presented to the board. So the real picture of what is happening in the organization should be presented. And so that can only happen when there is an element of trust and respect. The aspects of conflict management, I think within, as the board is carrying out its mandate, as management is carrying out its role, obviously there might be conflicts here, there, and I think that's why it's important to have proper, a clear definition of the roles, a clear channels of grievance. This is where the chair is very important. We also have the company secretary that is working on that relationship with in ensuring that the board relations are moving smoothly. And so conflict management is something that an organization might want to clearly define in its governance documents what needs to happen when there's a conflict, so that this can be resolved easily. And I think most importantly, it's the issue of diversity on the board is also critical. I think we don't want to see an all-male board, or an all-female board, or a board made up of people in the same age group, or etc. You want to create, you want to have a board which is properly diverse, a board that has the right qualifications, the right experience, so that they are able to provide that oversight. The organization will not be able to achieve its mandate. They may struggle to achieve their strategic objectives if that relationship is not made smooth. For the board chairpersons particularly, the relationship with the CEO is also very important. We've seen a lot of organizations that have gone into distress because the relationship between the CEO and the chair was strained. And obviously one of the two might eventually might have to go, and the organization obviously is the one that suffers. So that relationship between the board chairperson and the CEO is very important. And for the CEO also to know that they need to have the chairperson in their corner. It makes life easy. It makes the work of the CEO very easy, because then you are able to bounce off certain things to the chairperson even before the other board members are brought to speed in terms of what's happening. So that relationship is very important. And of course, the CEO, when they are running the entity, they are also a leader in terms of the management team. So they also has to be that respect and open communication with the management team, because what you don't want is after the board meeting, one of the managers then goes behind the CEO to go and tell maybe the board or the chair or any of the board members to say that, no, actually what the CEO was saying was not correct. We've seen that happen so many times. And so you want to have that open communication, clearly defined lines of communication, respect among board members themselves. The chair needs to give an opportunity for all the board members to be heard, and when that happens, then you get an organization that is effective, an organization that is moving forward. The relationship between the board and management is one of the key factors that a successful institution has in place. So we need to make sure that I think in all our organization, we work towards making this relationship smooth. Open communication is key. Open communication, trust is important. I think we've all heard in the recent past what is happening at OpenAI. We don't want, the CEO is fired today, rehired, then the board is fired. I think this is a serious symptom of what we are just talking about, the lack of trust, in terms of the definition of the roles, not aligning, because all the aspirations of the board and management have to be aligned if the organization is going to move forward. I think I'll end here for now, and yeah, I think I'll be able to take any questions if there are any. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Christabel. That was very good insights. I think Christabel has set the good context of the do's and don'ts on the part of both the board and the management. Basically, what should management do and what should the board do? I think both sides have those responsibilities. What does an empowered and collaborative board look like? You know, the sweet spot. She called it. Different roles, starting from the board chair to the CEO, to the company secretary, to management. At the end of the day, it's a common objective in the best interests of the company. So that's the common goal that should be looked at by both sides. So I kindly request that you type your questions in the chat box for Christabel and also for the panelists who are to come. We'll address these at the end of the session. And I also request that you stay muted for that purpose, just so that we have an easy flow of the session. So before we get into the panel discussion, I'm inviting the acting CEO for Leading Boards, Linda Sechitoleko, to give us a few remarks about Leading Boards Africa. This is the institute that has kindly arranged this session for us. Linda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stella. Good morning once again to everyone, and you're welcome to the boardroom. And this is Linda, like I've been introduced, Sechitoleko, and I am the acting Chief Executive Officer at Leading Boards Africa. Now, Leading Boards Africa is a global governance and leadership consultancy company, and we focus mainly on transforming Africa one organization at a time. To us, everything rises and falls with leadership and governance. And we mainly deal with challenges that are in the organizational governance, strategic performance, risk, compliance, and audit. We believe that we have the best solutions for you to motivate change in your organizations. Our visions is to have transformed and sustainable client institutions. And we do that by motivating superior performance in client organizations through delivery of exceptional and customized and effective governance solutions to support the services. We value professionalism and innovation, learning and excellence. Now, a brief about our services. We offer board programs, and in there we have training, induction, and governance audit. We also offer leadership programs, which includes training, executive coaching, and mentoring. And lastly, we have consultants and corporate secretaries, where we offer secretariat and management and company secretaries. If you want to find us, you will find us at Suite 309 BMK House, Nyabong Road, Wampeo Avenue. And that is basically us at Leading Boards Africa. We welcome you all for any of your needs in terms of governance and leadership solutions. Over to you, Stella, and we can proceed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda. And thank you so much on behalf of everyone for organizing this session. I think it's a very interesting topic, like we're already getting to see. And I hope you continue to organize more, you know. So at this point, I'll now introduce our esteemed panelists. For the sake of time, we'll just get right into it. We were meant to have a short break, but I think we're a little bit behind time. So these panelists are experts who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of corporate governance and leadership. And each of them is going to give us a unique perspective on this topic, which is going to help us better understand it. This is in addition to what Christabel has already given us. So I'll start with Mr. Parity Trinomjoni. Parity is a board member of Hawk's Eye Lodge, Bunyonyi, where he serves also as the managing director. He is also on the boards of Vision Group, Mengo Hospital, and Uganda Christian University. He also previously served at the National Housing and Construction Company, initially as the Chief Internal Auditor and also eventually as the CEO. He's a certified member of the Institute of Internal Auditors. The second panelist is Dr. Winifred Tarinieba Chiriabwire. Winnie is a Ugandan lawyer with over 20 years of experience and expertise in corporate governance and the financial sector regulation. She has a wide experience in governance and oversight responsibilities, and she currently serves on a number of boards as a non-executive director. Currently, she's the board chairperson of DFCU Bank, and she's also a non-executive director of MTN Uganda and Jubilee Alliance Uganda. She's a certified director with the Institute of UK, and she's also an associate professor of law at Makerere University School of Law, where she's teaching corporate governance, corporate finance law, and banking. The third panelist is Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Dr. Muhumuza is currently a member of the board of Bank of Baroda and African Forum, a network on debt and development, which is based in Harare. He previously served on the boards of World Vision, Uganda, Vision Fund, Uganda, Post Bank, Bank of India in Uganda, Scripture Union of Uganda, and Uganda Christian University Council. The last panelist is Dr. Rita Kabatunzi. She's a corporate lawyer and a chartered governance professional with 18 years of corporate experience. She's currently the company secretary for Stanbic Uganda Holdings, as well as its subsidiary, Stanbic Bank. Previously, she served as the company secretary at Vision Group, where she also dabbled in strategy and risk roles. She's a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute, that's ICSA, and she's also a founding member of its Ugandan branch. So as you can see, we have quite a diverse panel with a blend of perspectives and experiences, and I'm very confident that their insights are going to provide us with very valuable takeaways and strategies for fostering a strong and effective relationship between the board and management. So to all the panelists, thank you so much for being here to share your unique insights on this topic. So let's just dive right in. I think from Christabel's address, I think we're getting to see a bit more detail of just how important it is to have that good relationship between the board and management, because at the end of the day, it speaks into decision making, it goes into how effective the corporate governance of an organization is. And that productive relationship is critical for organizational effectiveness. But sometimes it can be very difficult to achieve in reality. You know, it's easy to say it in theory, but in reality, it's a different story. So Rita, could you just give us some reasons why the board and management would not be on the same page?
Thank you, Stella. Good morning to all the panelists and to the participants. Thanks for joining. Thank you to Christabel, who's actually done quite a commendable job in wrapping it all up. So I think she's made our work, excuse me, somewhat easier. So Stella, I think I wanted to start with laying the context. This is a discussion I think sometimes that we have as if it's one size fits all. And while there is a common problem around the delineation of roles and responsibilities, there are contexts that sometimes are important to note. One of them is that there's been somewhat of a shift in what was a traditional approach between the board and management. Very important context to understand that for boards in this context, the modern context, the risks of liability are very, very high. I think we know in Kenya the cases have started. We know that in the UK the cases have started as well. I guess Christabel could let us know if it's the same back home for her. So if you put into context that change in the way the business environment or whatever environment we're operating in has evolved, there is likely to be a difference in what we call oversight. So we love the word oversight, but when you ask yourself, okay, what's oversight? Is it the same for different companies? So for context, you have family-owned businesses, you have state-owned businesses, you have the large corporates and the not so large corporates. So if you are in a context where you're state-owned or you're a startup, it is possible that what will be seen as interference, is somewhat different. Now, the question of a productive relationship, yes, that's true in any case. But say you are a startup. David Nadler, who wrote an old article in Harvard Business Review, really did a good job in setting down a model. There were 5 models of boards. And one of them is a passive board, which I think Christabel spoke to. Then there's a certifying board that exists just to certify and say, yes, this is okay. You'll find state-owned enterprises sitting a lot in that space. You'll find for companies where the owner is really dominant, they'll tend to be passive. They're just there to, sort of help rubber stamp, create resolutions. You'll have an intervening board, which we might think is not a very good idea, but think about what happened when we're in COVID. The boards were not operating in the traditional way. The question is, should oversight continue in the old way, or has it actually reverted back to the old way? Should it change somewhat and become somewhat more collaborative? And then there is the intervening board. When you're in crisis, the board will actually get involved. We all love that saying, nose in, hands out. The question is the context. And I think, we have Dr. Winnie on the call, who's a chair, who I think will give us an interesting perspective on that. So think about that to start, and then think about what's the stage of the boards? What's the level of maturity? I think as a company secretary, what I've seen sometimes, and I've served and supported different types of boards, so I've had that benefit. Sometimes what is perceived as interference or non-productive also is based on the level of maturity of the board processes themselves. So Sharon speaks quite a bit about what they call the liberated board, which is where the interference, so to speak, is highest. Where you have the board asking for a lot of information, they are, coming in and being seen to be doing management's work. Now, if we put that into context, the question of what a productive relationship might shift slightly. Delineation of roles and responsibilities is very key in whichever angle you look at it. But we have to have that context in mind, because that context helps us not to use a one-size-fits-all. I thought I would lay that down and also lay down the change in the context within which businesses are operating. Shared purpose applies whether you're an NGO, whether you are a state-owned enterprise. So, which is why OECD has gone ahead to actually create guidelines even for state-owned enterprises. So, with that in mind, I think there are 2 factors. If I can bucket the comments that Christabel made, processes and people. Processes, big challenge around the lack of clarity of the roles. One would think that, and I know many of us take comfort in this, one would think if I have sort of written down what the roles of the board are and what the roles of management are, that is sufficient. And so we have delineated the roles. But there's a challenge here. There's people. And wherever there's people, the processes will be in place, your charters will be in place. But there will be that other challenge. I'll not discuss what needs to be done, because I think that comes in later. But the processes bit around clearly defining what the roles and responsibilities are, including when the board should come in, it becomes very, very key. So it's a big problem that we are not very clear, and it's very hard to tell what we will do in different circumstances. So it might not be it may be overarching, but not detailed. Then you switch to people, which is what most people talk about. Again, a need to keep in mind that there is what they call a constructive tension, and then there's conflict. So even as we speak, we have to make that delineation. And it is true that as management, we will not always like even the constructive attention. It's not something that we like. Someone has talked about us as Ugandans. We're generally not good at, confronting issues directly. So that speaks to, again, processes. What's your culture? What's the culture in your boardroom? We are taught to say, sir, madam, and that in itself means, there's going to be a bit of that. So the chair or management will give a task the chair will direct management, give a task, and management, instead of at that point, bringing up the debate and saying, look, maybe this is not possible for these and these reasons, management will say, yes, chair, and then go off. And to Christabel's point, will not get it done because they couldn't get it done in the first place. But we didn't say anything because our culture is that there's difference. Now, that's not all boards, but that's another reason why you may have a challenge. It's called task conflict. So there's task conflict, there's process conflict. Were we really supposed to do that? No, you were not clear at the last meeting, chair or directors. We didn't know that you had actually directed us. Which speaks to, are we summarizing the actual actions that management needs to go and finalize? Where you have a culture that doesn't actually enable openness and transparency, what will happen is management will say we're going to do it, and then you will have what we call the side chats, outside the boardroom, and that's where for a CS or company secretary, we see a lot of conflict will start to arise because then what starts to get round, suddenly, it's a question of why aren't we being upfront and discussing these things upfront? So we then switch to people. We are different. A board, on average, a board is what, seven members, 7 to 9, some 11. Imagine that, very different personalities. There's a lot of work that has been done around personalities. So we know that different personalities have different preferences. It creates a dynamic that if it is not well managed, will actually exacerbate what already is a tension between what are we supposed to do and what is the board supposed to do. A lack of shared timely information is a very big one. And again, that's down to processes. If you're not upfront and actually elevating these discussions when they're supposed to be elevated, there's going to be a problem. This is both because of processes, but largely because of people. And I think Christabel touched on that. Am I going to get hit on the head because as a CEO, something has gone wrong, a risk has materialized, or is the board actually going to collaborate with me and guide me? So a very, very big one around people is perceived conflict of interest. Perceived many times, sometimes actual, but many times perceived. Conflict of interest, I have found in my career has been, and perception a lot has been a cause of a breakdown in a relationship, especially around things like investment. Did you declare? I have heard that this person is connected to this, a decision they're asking us for, they didn't declare. So the conflict of interest piece in and of itself becomes a big challenge. I think the last one I'll speak to, because Christabel spoke to quite a bit of this. So again, when you talk about timeliness of information, it's also the quality of the information. The board that is not the independent directors who do not run the entity, many times are worried that they are not getting all the pieces that they need. So to Christabel's point around, don't skip, you shouldn't be seen to be skipping the CEO or management doesn't like that. Sometimes then they're finding out that, the director spoke to so-and-so to find out XYZ. That's a glass ceiling information problem, or sometimes a transparency problem. Maybe the other one is we have experts on the board. They are looking to be relevant. Sometimes they're experts in the areas where management is playing. And so the board sometimes, because of that expertise and a perception sometimes of ineptness on the side of management, may actually push a little too far and cause, a tension there. Is it constructive? Is it for the benefit of the organization? I guess it depends on the context of where it's being done. And if it's an intervening board, a lot of people will argue that it is actually in the interest of the business, because the argument is at that point, we're not worrying about whether we are interfering if we are trying to save the business or avert a crisis. So I thought I'll give that context. Christabel has spoken to quite a bit, but just for us to keep in mind that what is productive or not productive sometimes also has different lenses. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think there's another question around what we do about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rita. And thank you for ending on that note. You know, what's constructive, what's not constructive. And I think you emphasized the dynamic of people. You know, with people, there's no perfection. And if you're aiming for that openness and transparency that you're talking about, there has to be very clear communication between both sides. And that would go into setting the expectations, I believe. So Winnie, from your perspective, what would you say are the expectations from the board, from management by the board? What are those underlying causes of unfulfilled expectations on behalf of the board?
Thank you, Stella, and thank you, Leading Boards Africa, for inviting me to be part of this panel, and thank you, participants, for joining us this morning. So, both Christabel and Rita have said organizations are different. You have large organizations, you have small organizations, you have organizations in crisis, you have organizations that are doing well, growing. And so then the expectations will vary depending on the organization and where it is. So the basic things is that boards expect management to run the organization because that is not the job of the board. But like I said, the expectations will also vary. If an organization is in crisis, then keep us informed. Let us know what support you need. And I think we all experienced this during the COVID pandemic. If an organization is stable, everything is good, you're leading the market, good market share, I don't think that the expectation of the board is that you pat yourselves on the back and say, we are okay, number 2 is far behind us. No, come to the board and say, what's next? What should we do to keep in this position? And so this will vary again, depending on what do we see? What are the trends? What does that mean in terms of how we constitute ourselves as management, how we organize the business, the skill we want in the boardroom? So the board wants to see that management is constantly looking around the corner on how best to grow this organization, to preserve value, and to keep the organization going. Another basic expectation from management is information. Boards will not do their job without basic information. And so, again, related to the issue of unmet expectations, if we think about the basic usual things that boards do, meetings. When does the information come in to allow boards to prepare adequately for the meetings? How much is useful information for those meetings to be productive? And so you will find that boards or directors start to be uncomfortable if management expects decisions, but the information is coming very, very late. Timely information to the board, but most importantly, the board does not want management. The expectation is not that you throw all manner of information at the board and they just get lost swimming through what has been provided. Management must be clear. What dilemmas do you sit with? Okay, so then board can help you, the directors can help you navigate through these aspects. So that needs to be very, very clear, because sometimes that's where you have information is too much, now it is too little, and that ping pong has gone on for a long time between organizations. The second part of the question, I think, relates to unmet expectations. Now, like I said, perhaps sometimes when it is not clear about roles, there might be unmet expectations. Sometimes management are very clear that you are in the seat, you're the CEO, you're the executives, but they delegate decision-making, managerial functions upwards to the board. So when you'll find that some boards will be frustrated if they see that management, they don't want to take decisions. They want somebody to help them or to make decisions for them. There, of course, a key area where the unmet expectations relates to performance. If the organization is not moving in the right direction, there will be points of concern at the board level. If the management is not meeting board's expectations on this, boards may be harsh, there may be uncomfortable conversations, but sometimes you've got to ask the question, was the expectation clearly communicated? Do both parties understand why the expectation has not been met? And so those are some of the aspects that may cause those issues. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Winnie, for that. I think, yes, it's clear that, you know, both sides have to keep talking. You're right. If the expectations are not met, then there's that harsh atmosphere. Although sometimes some may also say that it is because of that harsh atmosphere from the outset that some sort of boss and subordination relationship may be met. And obviously, in such instances, there's that tendency to hide some information. So Parity, when you speak to some of the executives, in your view, what is the ideal board management relationship and why?
Thank you so much, Stella, for this invitation and also for colleagues for a contribution you've already made. I'm in the vehicle, so I'll switch off my video for the time being. One clarification, some organizations you have said I work on now, I've since left, like Vision Group, Mengo Hospital, and UCU, and I now serve on Kabale University and some few small companies. The question talks about the board relationship on management, looking at them subordinates. We've had some cases incidentally where we are training the board, and the boards actually tell you the CEO underlooks them too. We've had some cases where also the CEO is too big for the board, most especially where the board doesn't have direct responsibility in appointing the CEO, and the CEO thinks that the board is more inferior to them. And similarly, when that situation occurs, the relationship is also affected. What I look at as ideal, and which also my colleagues have already talked about, is where each of these participants, both management and the board, clearly understand their roles. And I think most of the conflict that we see, most of the misunderstandings, is when each of them don't take time to understand their responsibilities. Because sometimes you find some of the minutes of the board having issues that should have been resolved under management. And I want to believe some of these things come from when each of these organs do not understand their responsibilities, and sometimes when they don't respect each other, when there is mistrust. I've seen cases where, for example, the board chair is picking information from middle management and not going through the CEO. And I have also ever seen a case where the PA of the CEO was actually instructed by the board chair that any communication that goes to the CEO they must take a picture and send it to the board. I've also seen some few cases where the board chair actually sees information about some of the areas that the CEO is supposed to approve, and the board, one case where the board chairperson and the CEO was even not aware of that case, and some of these things I believe spring up One, because there is no effective trust. The CEO does not trust the board, or the board does not trust the CEO. Or when there is no effective communication. For example, where there are cases where communication to the board is only to the near the board meeting or near the board meeting, where there are no parameters that you communicate in between meetings, then you find that there's a problem. So the ideal board possibly would have more clear communication. What information do you give the board in between meetings, and what information do you give the board towards the meeting, and when do you actually communicate the meeting? I've seen cases where information is being distributed to the boards during the meeting, or even some information you don't receive it in the meeting and it is received outside the meeting. The decisions are made when you actually don't have information. The other is, do you have shared commitment to the goals of the organization? Does the board understand what the organization stands for and what you are intending to achieve? This is also some of the area where possibly if you don't understand where the organization is going, then this mistrust also happens. So an ideal organization should be where the board and the management have shared goals. So that when something is done, everybody sees that because it is in the interest of the organization. Then the other is where the board provides strategic guidance and oversight, and management implements those strategies. Then if that happens, then you'll know that once you have finished the board meeting and you go back, management is going to implement. Where the management does not implement, then there is reason for that and it is communicated. I've been to board meetings where I'm presenting as a head of internal audit, or where I'm presenting as a CEO, and you go to the board and the board approves something, and then you go back and you're like, the board didn't understand, or they don't want us to achieve this. Or when you take a proposal, the board is asking themselves, what is the other information behind this proposal? And because of that, it is thrown out of the meeting, and it is critical to your strategy. So where you find that the board is not looking at where management is looking, they are looking somewhere else, that possibly will have a problem for the organization. But where you go to the board and everybody knows the strategy you are presenting for approval is good for the organization, then it becomes easier for both of the parties, both of the organs to move in one direction. So in summary, what we are looking at is, can we have open dialogue? Can we have transparency? Can we have clear division of responsibilities? And once this happens, then we'll have a healthy relationship between the board and management. Thank you so much, Stella.
Yes, thank you so much, Parity. Maybe you can also talk about in cases where the board may, where management feels that the board is now operational, it's now getting into too much detail. You hear that complaint amongst management teams that, no, our board is just too operational. What do you think would cause it? And do you think it's called for some time?
Thank you so much again, Stella. There will be some cases where we can find that the board is operational, or where they try to put their nose in everything within the organization. And usually this can result from lack of clarity regarding, again, roles and responsibilities, where the board feels they need direct involvement, or where there is mistrust. They don't trust that the board, the team they have on management can help, and we find they again want to put their nose in it. We've seen too much of this more in the procurement process or in the investment process, where sometimes the management presents something to the board, investment decisions. Then you find sometimes, I've seen that case where the board appoints a committee to now go and see how the decision is implemented by management. I've also seen cases where I was on an organization, and the board even put a committee to meet every Monday to make sure to actually approve what management was going to go to implement during the week. though that was unique because it was a caretaker management where we were at that time. But it's certainly not a good thing. But usually where that comes out sometimes when there is a crisis, maybe there is a transition of management, or where there is a vacuum, or maybe there is caretaker management, or there is an acting CEO, or where there is complete mistrust, where the board does not trust that management will implement and the board has no power to change. But when you look at all that, then when there is direct board involvement, sometimes management will sit back. I can't implement this because the board has not approved it. I can't go through this because I might lose my job. And this is, again, bad for the organization. So we believe it's crucial that the board concentrates on oversight. It's also crucial that the board understands its responsibility when management is not up to the standard required by the board. The solution is not supervisory. We've seen cases actually where a board does not want to make a decision on management. And instead of that, they actually put other controls that will sometimes be cost of the organization, but also constrain operations of the organization. And when this happens, you'll find that the organization again suffers, strategy is not implemented, and mistrust continues to happen, and the organization does not move. It's not a good thing. In a crisis, short-term basis, when there's caretaker management, it might be acceptable, but where it is, the board should communicate. Even where it happens, it should be short-term, not long-term. And this should not be a daily thing in an organization. But again, at the end of it all, it is how the roles of the different parties in the governance process are clearly defined. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Parity. And Fred, I'll just ask you to talk about the other side of the coin. Yes, the board is not operational, but at the same time, there are those boards where you could say they are passive. There's the recent Theranos scandal of Elizabeth Holmes, where, you know, she basically duped the board simply because it was passive. They did not get into the details of matters that they were probably discussing and approving. So based on that, how do you think, how involved do you think that the board should be without descending into the arena too much? And Fred, I'll ask you to just keep it a little brief so that we can later leave some time for the Q&A. Thank you. Fred, you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you, leading boards, for the invitation and for the question, really, and good morning to every participant here. I think it's a question of the competencies of the board, and I think this has come through the discussions. That's why I will actually be brief as requested, because a lot has been said and just really putting an icing on the cake. Many times we assume the board members know what they are supposed to do and their roles, which speaks to the point of recruitment of board members and identification. Many times, as we know, boards are created out of friendships, clubs, and sometimes many other factors that have little to do with the mission and vision of the organization. So it just becomes a club on top of an institution of people who know each other, and how they found each other there is not so much of an issue, and which of course can make them passive. Many of them, it's also expectations. You'll hear, and I've sat in meetings where people nominate board members, and they simply say, oh, so and so lost out his job or is now retired, why don't we find him a position on this institution? And it's common with quite a number of both public and private institutions, including NGOs and others. And I think it has also come through the chat box trade. If you are a church and there are these leaders supposed to be on the board, and we have also found that in institutions of government, where they say the following institutions shall constitute the board. Now remember, these institutions recruited their staff for other purposes. You didn't go to work in the Ministry of Health so that you can sit on the board of national medical stores or national health authority, whatever it is. You were recruited and you are promoted to those ranks for other purposes. Now, nobody prepared you for the roles that you are now playing in the board. Now, in the event of that, it becomes very, very critical to do board inductions, which can bring up people to speed, because you are not entirely as an institution in charge of who joins your board. You may find like 60 or even 70% of your board is constituted by from institutions that you don't have a role on. So it's sometimes incumbent upon the CEO to make sure the board know their roles and they are driven to actually participate in those roles, approving the policies and doing those sorts of things. So giving inductions is critical, but also sometimes we do board visits. You can allow one board to go and observe another board in operations. As indicated, I was chair of the board of World Vision, and I was given an opportunity to go and observe very many boards, including the board of Canada, which in the family of World Vision Global was considered one of the best and possibly still is one of the best. So you go there and watch how the other boards are operating and how the other board members are operating. So it speaks back to whether people know their roles and whether people can manage their personal interests, expectations. Some people appointed on the board come expecting personal rewards or personal influences, really forgetting that a board should be homogeneous, speaking one voice, doing one act. Now, all that is sometimes team building events, because even an entire board can't really be passive. It could be either the chair, that is the mod, or committee chairs, or some group of members, but really somebody can bring them up. Some team building events can help, including board members themselves, because as we said, they come from different constituencies. They may not know each other. So how well they blend within and outside the board becomes important, but also as well as blending with the management itself. How best do you bring all those things on board? I think there is also the question of board members now beginning to go below, getting involved, which is really the opposite of passiveness. But they may be passive in the board meetings, but they're actually active with management and engaging management. There are a few cases where we have had to do what I would call an expanded board, because in some cases they say the board, only the CEO will be there as secretary to the board. But remember, you're giving and discussing issues that are going to involve all of senior management during implementation, but possibly also the entire senior management participated. I'm saying hopefully, because that's what it's supposed to be, in preparing the board papers. So I have on occasions demanded that some of the heads of critical organizations or departments come and be part of the board meeting. Sit at the back, you not participate, but you want to hear where the board is coming from. Because if the board is being harsh to the MD or the CEO, and then he goes and transfers that voice to the management, senior management, they may think he's just being hostile to them, forgetting to the board that demanded some of this. But also some of these answers clearly lay with those heads of departments. So in my case, many cases I've had to ask some of the people, like head of compliance, head of internal audit, head of risk, if it's a bank, head of credit, because that's where the biggest risks and the business of the bank lies, to come and be part of some of these. Besides just making presentations and going away, you want some of them to sit in. So I think the issue of passiveness can be cured in a number of ways, as been indicated. Individuals knowing their roles, which can be done through induction, but also managing their own expectations and worries. Some of them feel it's a privilege to sit on the board, and they will just don't want to ruffle any feathers. So they prefer taking a passive position, thinking they are securing their own presence there, and yet they might actually be undermining the institution. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Fred, for that. Just like us now to talk about the different roles that have been mentioned throughout the discussion. the role of the CEO, the role of the company secretary. So I'll just start with Winnie. I think we can all agree that, you know, the role, the relationship between the board and the CEO is a very delicate one. And if it's not done right, it can have destructive conflict in the boardroom. Like Christabel mentioned, there's that open AI discussion that's all over the internet right now, where the CEO was fired, rehired, you know, the board was put into question. The board members have had to be replaced substantially. So bring it close to home. What would you say the underlying causes of a poor board and CEO relationship are? And could you give us some tips on building and enriching that relationship? I'm requesting that you're brief on this one, Winnie, and then Rita can tell us about the company secretary role as well.
Okay, thank you. Of course, you've asked me to be brief on a very a topic that requires significant discussion. One is, it boils down to a couple of things. The relationship between the two parties, got to understand each other, their personalities. Sometimes it's just basic personality clashes. So it is important that the two people learn how to relate. And of course, once the roles are clear, and then everybody knows their space in this. We also must understand that the two need to know, they set the tones. The board chair sets the tone at the board level, and the CEO sets the tone for the management. And so if the relationship is fractured, then these are going to spread through the other two. But I also want maybe make one more final point. We make the mistake when we focus on just those two. The culture of the organization. If it's a toxic environment, if it's an environment of mistrust, if it's an environment where there are other parties, and I think Fred hinted on this, in public sector organizations, the minister appoints perhaps the CEO, and maybe that was not the choice of the board. So what signals are being sent in those circumstances? The shareholders, some major stakeholders, it might be the founders of the organization. Are we all aligned in terms of our expectations, in terms of what we want this organization to do? If there are conflicting messages being sent, then that is going to impact on the relationship. So I would advise that if there are points of tension, let's not just look to the board and management. Let's not just look to the CEO and chair. They play an important role, yes, but let's find out where are the issues coming from. So we ensure that all parties are aligned and all parties are able to communicate in an open and transparent manner in order to get this working. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Winnie, for that. And yes, Rita, you can tell us about what role does the company secretary play, or what can they do to help with that relationship between the CEO and the board, or just management and the board? Rita, you're muted.
Thank you, Stella, and thank you, Winnie. Winnie has put it quite well. I think I'd like to summarize a couple of things around the role of the company secretary generally. The company secretary is the confidant of the board. Yeah, the company secretary is the eyes of the board on the ground. The company secretary is the bridge, and that means the bridge goes both ways, you know, helping the board understand management and helping management understand the board. If you think about this, is the relationship builder. So if you bucket this as if we talk about processes, if the processes are not right, how does the company secretary define these relationships better? In my experience, I've found the definition of matters arising, matters reserved for the board to be a very, very good one. Real clarity. When you do your board charter, you add that aspect. What are the matters reserved for the board? And you follow that up with what we call an information architecture. This one can be tricky to do. What information goes to the board, when and how? Once there's that level of clarity, the processes bit is taken care of. Then you go to the relationships. As Winnie has said, there are different personalities. So if the personalities are different, you have to help these board members understand each other. Fred spoke about this. You have to create an environment that exists outside the board meetings. So your informal sessions are very, very key. Many companies or organizations only meet in the boardroom. That element of building trust cannot be done just in the boardroom. You've got to help these directors understand each other better and understand management more. Winnie has made an important point around tone at the top. That tone is seen by everybody. Now, the company secretary is the one who sees what the reaction is by management and what the reaction is at the board level. It is the company secretary, therefore, who knows where the needs and the gaps are. I've always said, if you're not using your board evaluation to surface issues, because that's what the company secretary is supposed to do, to surface the issues so that you can agree an actual action point, if you're able to afford it with an external facilitator and track that, then you're not using the evaluation properly. So again, that goes to processes. So there is knowing each other, knowing this is my strength, the other one likes things done this way, the CE knows the chair and understands the chair understands the CE. That's just one part. There has to be a real effort to actually build a culture where the dynamics are right. And sometimes you can't do that on your own. Some people have used senior directors on the board. Sometimes there's that one person who tends to be listened to, who might help the relationship become more productive. If you don't have that, then try and take advantage of a few sessions in between meetings. That in between meetings is crucial to build the right dynamics. If that's not done, then everything else that you write will not be clear. Also, please make sure that your delegation of authorities as boards and the CE are well discussed. What are you actually delegating? I think one of the panelists mentioned that, I think it was Winnie, the board delegates to the CE or the chief executive. Have they understood how much delegation you have and how much they can delegate downwards? Because sometimes the tensions come from learning that things were done at management and they're saying, that should have come to the board. It should have been ratified by the board. And it was a genuine failure to understand how much authority do I have? Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do the other? What are the stop points? So very, very big on managing the relationships is also, do we have closed sessions to talk about where we are not happy as independent nets? And then look back as chief executive on what we want changed. If you're really unhappy that management is not finalizing matters that you've asked them to finalize, have an actual discussion, preferably not during the board meeting, because the board meeting has its own agenda. I think those are the primary things that I would say, can help to actually make that relationship more productive and remove some of the tensions, as well as induction. We all know that induction is a very big part of creating the right expectations, setting the expectations right from the beginning. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Rita. I'll just circle back to Winnie to just tell us a bit more about, where yes, there's the CEO, but sometimes boards will want to go below the CEO. Some board members have expressed that desire to go and talk to the heads of department, just find out what's happening below that surface. And yet the usual board practice is against this. So how best can the board access that information below C-level without, I would say, stepping on the toes of the CEO?
Okay, I think Fred touched on this, and I'm not even sure whether it's the usual board process that you don't go below the CEO. So let me just start with something very basic. As a board, you're responsible for succession planning. Now, how do you assess the next person to take over from your current CEO, whether it's internally or outside? Do you just wait to interview when the CEO is exiting, or if it's a sudden exit, you do ping pong and say we appoint somebody as acting? If you don't see these people and interact with them, how do you assess their competencies, and how do you even think about developing them? Okay. And if you think about the executive team, the CEO has overall responsibility, but Fred also hinted some important roles. head of internal audit definitely must have a clear line of communication with the chair of the audit committee. And you have different functions in the organization, the head of risk. So how do you assess their leadership capabilities, the gaps that you need in order to build them into leaders within the organization? So these interactions, in my view, should take place in the committees, and to some limited degree, they should take place also in the boardroom. Now, on the issue of information, yes, traditional information comes through the CEO, but again, let's go back to the culture, through the secretary. Let's go back to the culture of an organization. If we have a culture of open and transparent communication, then why am I actually worried about gates of communication? Why is that a critical issue? I may have been reading some board papers, honestly, and I have questions. It might be that I'm reading the finance committee papers. I have questions. You mean I cannot send a message to the CFO and say, but this is not clear, or this, I must now go through the official channel? I think when we create these barriers, we must ask the question, why are we creating them? And is it in the interests of the organization? We have seen that because of technology and several other factors, increasingly these barriers are coming down. And we must not allow these barriers in organizations. We must be intentional about having sight of some people below management, because that tells us, if board comes and says, and in the board meeting, the CEO comes and says, we are at 80% of our training budget, this is the support we give to our people, I don't need a form or some formal assessment to tell me that we are actually training our people better. I just need a conversation to know as to whether actually we're getting it right or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Winnie, for that. I think we'll now just close the panel session, just to allow for some Q&A for the panelists to answer some of the questions that have come into the chat box. Thanks for keeping it active in the chat box. A few comments have been made, just responding to some of the issues that have been discussed. I'll start with the question, which was given by Juliet. And this is, I'll pose this to parity. Juliet's question is, sorry, I think Juliet's first question was answered. Her second question was already answered. Let me go to Elizabeth. So Elizabeth's question is that in the event that there's already friction between the chairman and the CEO, and the chairman engages the CFO more than the CEO, as company secretary, do you resolve this dispute? What steps can be taken to improve this relationship and maintain communication lines of the three? That will be yours, Rita, and I request that you also answer it together with Lydia's question, which is that, is a company secretary a hired lawyer or a full-time worker or a board member?
Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Stella, and to both the participants for those questions. So I'll start with the second one. So a company secretary in Uganda, really, mostly they're lawyers. You could have, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I've gotten the question fully. You could have them full-time or not. You could use a firm. That means you outsource. It's not a good idea to use a board member, though for smaller entities that does happen, but it is encouraged to maintain some sort of delineation and to allow for the company secretary to be the advisor and not a director who also has roles and responsibilities. It's advisable that you perhaps outsource it rather than have a board member also serve as company secretary. Of course, there are confidentiality issues there. But yes, there's quite some leeway on how you choose to have the company secretary. There is a lot of advocacy for an in-house hired company secretary, but they don't have to be a lawyer. though it is common to have lawyers. Chartered accountants have done it. Some have even used HR professionals, for example. So on to Elizabeth's question. I think Winnie has done a very good job of, first of all, distilling this notion that that going to someone other than the CEO is necessarily a problem. Now, obviously, there has to be diplomacy on all ends. The chair, assuming you have a chair who's mindful that this may be viewed a certain way, some level of transparency around the discussions helps. And the company secretary's role is, as I said, to discreetly and diplomatically help to maintain and manage relationships. So you could have a discussion with the chair, if you have the right relationship, to understand the concerns that the chair may have had, understand whether this was intended to be a confidential discussion or it's open. And if it is open, then in my case, I have made an effort to just make sure that the CEO is aware that, you know, the chair prefers to have a direct discussion with the CFO, and the CFO should then also ensure that they're not creating friction by taking this as the chair is speaking to me and didn't speak to you. And if you're careful about how you do it, you could actually end up having these three people sitting together somewhere. And that is why I say informal sessions are actually quite important. And inevitably there would be a discussion around the issue if it was intended that way. If the chair is looking for expert advice, I think the CEO has to have the right level of stead and maturity to know that this is not an attack on them directly. What you could do is also create room for the chair and the CEO to have their own regular meetings, so that the CEO also feels heard and there's a tripartite sharing of communication. I think sometimes company secretaries try to force the three parties to talk, and there's a lot of diplomacy that you need here, and hopefully you have the right type or caliber of professionals who can understand, as Winnie said, that I may need information firsthand, and it is not, there's no problem with me asking for it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rita. So I'll just go back to Juliet's question. I think she'd still want it answered. Parity, I'll give you this. Her question is it okay to have staff nominated as members of the board, knowing that boards have an oversight role? And how should the CEO relate with staff who are also board members? She's wondering, is there a conflict of interest on the part of staff?
Thank you so much, Stella. I think I've seen mostly with the banks and some few organizations where we have executive directors that also are on the boards. That's quite unique, but I would believe that their roles should be clearly defined, so that the roles related to the board are clearly defined and the roles they have in management are clearly defined. I've seen organizations where, most especially universities, where you have 5 or 6 people sitting on the councils, and usually you have the university secretary, sometimes you have the bursar, sometimes you have one of the deputy vice chancellors that sit on council. What we usually have as a problem is when the issues of management are actually discussed on the board, or where you find that there's disrespect of the head of the organization because some people are already on the board. They are more of, if this can't be resolved at management level, we are going to take it to the board. Sometimes you have that conflict, but where their responsibilities are clearly defined, because what I have seen, even their presence on the board is more on presenting management papers. And sometimes I've seen that on such boards, then the management does not participate in the major resolutions of issues where it comes to voting. That's what I've seen on university councils, because I think that's university councils, whether private or public, that's where we are seeing more than 3 or 4 people from management being part of the board. Sometimes even the guild president, you find them on the university councils. It has a bigger problem on confidentiality, because some information moves out. It has a bigger problem on lobbying, Sometimes you go for a meeting and you find you have 3 or 4 people already lobbying, don't approve this, don't do this. The DVC wants to do this, the university secretary wants to do this. Sometimes it can be a problem on controlling information, on controlling loyalty, on controlling respect for each other. So it's not something that should really be promoted. But where it happens in the banking industry, I think it's easier because the roles are clearly defined, what the MD should do and what the executive director should do. But where it's not legislated, it's one thing maybe that one should avoid. And where people come in, they should be ex officio and not real members of the boards. So where possible, it should not be regulated. That would be my contribution to that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Parity. I'll now move on to James and Lydia's questions. I'll put that to Fred. What best practices would you recommend for board member recruitment for non-profit organizations? And also, secondly, what advice would you give to a church institution which mandates church leaders to become board members by virtue of their position? Over to you, Fred.
Yeah, thank you, Stella. I think we've hinted on this. Board recruitment really, as hinted on earlier, can sometimes be complex, as Parrot has just indicated from that earlier question, where you'll find that some membership is defined. Now, it is by office. If they are saying the university secretary shall be a member, the students' guild leader shall be a member. Now, by the time you're done your degrees of freedom to find who should be on that board, are left to possibly 2 out of 7 members. They are all out there. Now, you wonder in that case whether the institution itself has any privilege on board recruitment, because it is defined by who is being appointed out there, occupying those offices, and they pop up. And we find it even within the churches. The other not-for-profit, especially the not-for-profit, you'll find shareholders. These ones have roles. But the basic thing that should guide the process, because you can also guide that process on who should be coming on, and we saw this in the NSSF, where the minister requested some board members to go off for managing the agenda of the board, is to have that matrix. And the matrix can reflect the skills that the institution needs, so that you want to communicate to whoever is responsible for sending people to this board to know the needs of the institution. If we need a lawyer, we have none. That's what we should be looking for. If you are looking for an auditor, if you are looking for an engineer, depending on that. So the policies need to be clear, the recruitment policies on which skills are needed, because you can still find them out there. It's a church, the person must be a reverend or a bishop. But can you find us one that is close? Or if not, find us one that will represent that constituency. So all those rules need to be clear. So a matrix that develops the gender requirements, that develops the skill requirements. Sometimes it's tribal requirements and regional dimensions. It becomes a very complex thing, but as Parity and others have indicated, having a clear policy that is speaking to the needs of the organization is very clear. And if the shareholders can, through an AGM or whichever other means, endorse those policies that board has passed and put in place, then everything becomes clear, which is also speaking to the earlier conversation on staff being members of the board. What is their role? Once those are clarified, then the rest will fall into peace. It becomes hazy. Like even as we're saying, the question of people beginning to go down and ask the CFO, ask the HR, it's not that because they have gone down there. They have to understand what is happening at that level, but the rules must be clear. I really like it with the central bank, because the central bank has provided guidance that can inform other boards and other organizations. In terms of the membership, Parity has mentioned in the banks have really even categorized the executive directors. They are non-executive directors, but who may not be independent because of their close association with shareholders. And then they are independent non-executive directors. And these now must be the heads of the committees. Now, there is the role of the BAC, Board Audit Committee. It is required to have a regular interaction with internal audit. outside the board meetings and outside the presence of the CEO and other staff. That's a requirement. And the central bank checks on that to see whether the board audit committee is actually having those meetings with the head of internal audit. As we've said, the head of internal audit is the eyes of the board in management. He can even give you the idea, he or she can give you the tensions that are happening within the organization way before they explode. So I would encourage those good practices that have been put in separate boards or in different kind of jurisdictions or categories to really be spread out, so that because they are not offensive, they are not negative, they actually build the bond. Interactions with the internal audit have helped me to even know when the cost of HR, which we approve as a board, and HR says, I am the one who determines the courses people should take. But shouldn't these courses be and the needs be determined by the heads of departments? Well, they are the ones who know the skills they need. But you'll find you approved a budget for people to go out and train, and the people going out to train are friends and relatives of either HR or the ED, not necessarily determined by the needs of the department. To understand those dynamics will take an interaction officially made and defined and known with some of the internal managers besides the CEO or even company secretary. So I think recruitment guidelines, policies, and every other thing, who is going on when, can we plan and replace them, will be important even for non-profit and church-related organizations across the board, even with the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'll pose the next question to Christabel. This is from Marianne and Regis. And the questions are, what can be done to ensure that the right relationship remains healthy, the right relationship between the board members and management remains healthy without crossing those boundaries? And then Regis is asking about the challenge of diversity and inclusion, just implementing it in terms of meaningful contributions to decision-making, especially based on gender and causing bad relationships. Over to you, Christabel.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just turn on my screen. Yeah, all right, thank you. So I think the last one on what can be done to improve diversity on the boards. I think this is at the point that the boards are being constituted. I think there has to be that that lobbying, especially for government boards, state-owned boards. I think there has to be some form of lobbying by the different groupings to ensure that we get a diverse blend, and sometimes by the same institutions, because for parastatals you find the ones that have been brought on by an act of parliament, the acts define who's supposed to be sitting on the boards. So the institutions, when those boards are being constituted, I think it would be good for them to proactively ask that the institutions that they nominate, they can try and improve diversity. For private boards, it's easier. I think the owners of the organization, I think they have to take that into consideration when putting together a board. So the diversity is just not in terms of the gender. It should also be in terms of the age. It should also be in terms of the skills mix as well. So there has to be that balance. So really, I think it's about just lobbying and ensuring that when the board is constituted, it's done correctly. In terms of maintaining a healthy relationship, I think we did I spoke about the issue of knowing the roles, and I know the other panelists have also spoken strongly about the different roles, the need to keep in your lane. One of the things that also helps improve the relationship is when the CEO and the chairperson relationship is smooth, it also sort of sets the tone as well for the other participants in this equation. So I highly encourage, practically, if you are a chief executive, to ensure that you have those one-on-one sessions with your board chairperson from time to time. I think it's very important because then it just, it keeps the communication lines open. If there's anything that you need to bounce off the chair, that also helps. In terms of for the other board members, the chair also now is then key in ensuring that there's communication amongst the board members. So in this day and age, there's so many ways that you can use to just keep the other board members informed, so that they are not shocked when certain things are happening in the institution. Or we don't want also again a situation where the chairperson says no. Maybe there's a lot of things that have happened and the chairperson has made a decision outside the board. Because even when the CEO is bouncing off, it's merely just bouncing off, and no decision should be made officially by the chairperson outside the board meeting. So I think it's a constant, you have to strive to constantly do different things to try and improve the relationship. As long as everybody is operating within their roles, I know the dynamics change, especially when it comes to state-owned institutions, but I think we should all strive to make sure that the communication is open and there's that constant engagement. And the key is the relationship between the chairman and the CEO. I think that's how I can respond to those two questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Christabel. I'll request Hajat Seviala to talk. Her hand has been up for some time. I'm just requesting for about 15 more minutes for your time. We're sorry we started late, and so we should have ended by now, but kindly just give us 15 minutes. Hajat Seviala can ask her question, and then I'll pose the questions of Davis, Rita, and Geoffrey to Winnie before I ask the panelists to give their final last parting shots. Hajat Seviala, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Hajat Seviala, Mama Insurance Africa. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Christabella from Zambia and all the panelists for a very rich discussion this morning. I have a comment, but also a question and something very, very brief to share. My comment is on the bonding of the board with management. In some boards, we had on the board calendar a monthly meeting of the board chair with the CEO. It was a monthly. It had to be done so that every month the chair and the CEO had a meeting outside the normal meeting to catch up with events in the organization, but also to bond. Maybe that is a good practice, or maybe members can comment also. About induction, yes, induction is good, but you see these members, induction, when they are new, they're just like all getting into the system. They don't know much about the system. It's bringing them on board. We should encourage the continuous capacity building of boards, but also the informal team buildings of boards. We should make sure that we have informal team building so that the board and management are able to be in an informal setting where there is team building activities, so that they are able to bond outside the formal institution meeting. Lastly, I want to share my worst experience as a board member. My worst experience is where you have the law putting the CEO as the board secretary at the same time. It has been so challenging to someone who knows board processes. And as we heard from Rita, it is the CEO is supposed, the secretary is supposed to be the link, the board secretary between management and the board. And but now when you have the CEO who is the board secretary at the same time, I would like to hear from the members there, the experienced members, how that role, how now the role of company secretary is played, where you have the CEO who is the board secretary by law at the same time. You know, each of these posts has clear duties, but now you have this CEO. So I'd like to hear from Rita and anybody else how that institution can go about having an effective, those roles played effectively. Lastly, I would like to congratulate Winnie Chiliawire for the lead award she won last evening at Sheraton. Congratulations to you, and thank you so much. Continue being the excellent board member that you are, and continue sharing with all of us. Thank you so much, Leading Boards Africa, for bringing us together. We are over 120 and all brood, and they're listening attentively and learning. Over to you, moderator. Thank you so much. If anybody would love to comment on my comments, I would be very, very delighted. I thank you so much. This is Hajat Sebiala. I love boards, wherever there is board capacity building, I love it. Even this one, I love it so much. Bye-bye, and over to you, my dear.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hajat Sebiala, for injecting extra energy in us this morning. We've been here for quite some time, so we needed that power push at this point. And Winnie, I'm extending my congratulations as well for the award that you won yesterday. Well, I think, Rita, would you like to answer or to comment briefly on what Hajat Sebiala has talked about? I think she posed a question to you.
Thank you, Stella. And Winnie, obviously, congratulations are in order. Thank you, Hajat Sebiala. We've had this discussion before. That challenge usually exists in small businesses and in state-owned businesses. Now, obviously, in state-owned businesses is statutory. So, meaning there's not much you can do about it. I think the biggest challenge with that is that the most essential role of a company secretary, if they are doing their role well, is to serve as a trusted advisor. Now, if you are a director and you are also a trusted advisor, unless the selection of this person has been done with a lot of consideration of what we call their cognitive abilities, whether they think through things and their ability to remain independent, it will be a problem. So how do you mitigate? Because you can't change the law. What I've seen some people do is to then say, okay, the member is also the secretary, but really someone else will perform the secretarial duties. So in effect, it's not the same person. It is because the trusted advisor role is still sitting with this person. The chair has to navigate this very, very, with a lot of sensitivity and sense check the things that the member suggests as a secretary against other directors. So there has to be a check and balance using the board. So the secretary's position has to be checked around, is this because this person holds both offices or because they genuinely think this is the best possible position? It's not good practice, to be honest. But in statutory businesses, all you can do is mitigate. I think that's the best that you can do. You don't want to be breaking the law, because even though you delegate that secretarial role to someone, that member or CEO will always be the person responsible. So the board chair, using the other INEDs to sense check what is being advised on, helps to mitigate that risk, but it is statutory, so you can have a problem there.
Yes, thank you so much, Rita, for that. I think now, lastly, I'll just pose the next few questions to Winnie. These are from Davis, Rita, and Geoffrey. The first is that what are the practical possibilities of not just enlightening the board on good corporate governance practices, but actually achieving them for effective buy-in and change for the benefit of the organization? Rita's question was on what advice would you give on disintegrated boards where there's mistrust and they don't see eye to eye. Regarding Geoffrey's question, this was on the just providing more clarification on the oversight of the board. I think you briefly touched this in the chat. You can speak a little more if you wish to. Over to you, Winnie.
Thank you. The interesting questions. I know we don't have a lot of time. I have answered in the chat room the oversight role of the board, various aspects, compliance, risk, ensure the adequate controls. Each of these will lay in different functions, but we must remember that an organization is not a silo and the responsibility lies with the board. Is your compliance function working? Is your internal controls function working? So just look at the summary that I provided in the chat room. People are not seeing eye to eye. That's not anywhere where in the corporate governance manuals. Now we're dealing with people. And so we come back to the basics of how we deal with people. How do we resolve conflict? We must find ways outside the boardroom to build these relationships, to make sure that we work on the egos, to make sure that we get talking, we resolve the points of friction. Sometimes people have to move. We must face that reality that we can ask those to move. But like I said, there are always issues outside the boardroom. And so we must also be mindful, where is this coming from? And we make sure that we bring this to the table in conversations that help us to nurture and build these relationships. Practical aspects, let me just use one example, conflict of interest, okay? Now, and we experience this all the time. If board members, we must set the tone, we must set the example. If we declare a conflict, if we manage various aspects of our roles in a transparent manner, we send the right signals to management. You can't be expecting that management don't do this, and yet they see, you sometimes think they don't, but at board level, you're actually doing these things. And so if we want transparency, we must live by transparency. If we need to have a proper ethics framework, it must start at the board, and then we build it through the organizations. So these are some very simple, basic ways. Somebody said, I think it was Fred, on how we constitute the boards. If we are bringing in our friends, then they align with us, they do this, we know that we are sending those signals. But if we have open, transparent processes, we ask the question, what skills does this organization need? How do we bring those skills on board? Then we've actually done it in a practical and transparent manner. And by the way, another area that I find quite interesting is that board may be very, very busy expecting management to perform excellently. You have high standards of expectations for management, but you tolerate the reverse at board level. Do you have those open in the board evaluations and say, but you're not engaged, you don't even read the materials. You perhaps maybe we need a different skill at the boardroom, and you have those tough conversations. So don't expect to have that with management, and at the board level, you're actually tolerating incompetence. You're tolerating people who can't even do the basic read the board papers. They come and ask what is at page 2 of the board pack. Okay, so those are some of the basic practical things we need to be able to do. I have received lots of congratulatory messages. Thank you. I've acknowledged them in the chat. Thank you very much. And I think I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Winnie. And I think I'll just now go into the parting shots of the panelists. Winnie, since you have the floor, do you have any parting shots before we go to the rest?
Yes, I'll say governance is a journey. Board management relationships is the same. It's like all aspects of our relationships with our children, with our spouses, with our friends. This we build over time. We build trust over time. We get to know each other. We should be able to trust each other. So don't expect it to happen overnight. We must be intentional about having the right governance frameworks, about getting it right. We live in interesting times, lots of disruptions. Everybody's talking about what happened at AI and everything. And we also have a couple of things that disturb us all the time in organizations, but we also have good stories. So let's give it our best. If you're asked to be on a board, commit your time. Ask, do I have the time? Do I bring the right skill to the board? How do I keep myself informed? And am I contributing to the good governance of this organization? That should always be what we aim for. We're helping to build the skills. So let's continue the conversations. Thank you, Leading Boards Africa, for inviting me to be part of this. It is my passion. And so I'm happy to always be part of your conversations. And thank you to everybody. And to all of you that I may not get the chance to see, Merry Christmas. I hope that the rest of the year goes well for each one of you. Wishing you good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Winnie. Over to you, Fred. Your parting shots, please.
Yeah, parting indeed. I think it's been a pleasure being part of this conversation, and want to thank Leading Board Africa and the rest of us who have been on this team. I think this is really the way to go. Board members are not born, they are made, and the broader the experiences people get, the better. Looking back, the experiences I've picked from being on different boards, not-for-profit, some-for-profit, government agencies, non-government agencies, has really helped me appreciate the different contexts. And I think the boards need to understand the context. There are certain generalities that would apply to all boards, but there are certain contextual situations that each board member and each board must put into practice. But that said, there are certain things to learn from other boards within other contexts. They may not be required in this particular board, but having that wrapped up is a good thing. So I would recommend more of such conversations by Leading Board Africa, and encourage many of the board members, but also prospective people who want to join the board to understand what happens elsewhere. These experiences are really handy. Thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Fred. Parity.
Thank you so much, Stella, for inviting me, getting me off the shores of Lake Bunyonyi, where I've enjoyed this meeting. We've certainly looked at the effective board management relationship and seen that's built on clear communication, mutual trust, shared commitment. We've also seen that there may be some few aspects, depending on how the board is appointed, for operational participation in operational activities, but as a temporary thing. What I think we pick more is that there has to be a health balance that should be essential. But overall, we believe the board should focus on strategic oversight and leave day-to-day operations to the management team. We also have seen that we certainly need a collaborative approach that enhances organizational effectiveness and ensures that each party is in the corporate governance system do the activities and their role. Thank you so much, and I look forward to more of these constructive discussions in the future. And God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Parity. I'll request Christabel as well. Any parting shots?
Thank you very much. I think what remains is it's been a very interesting conversation. And just to thank Leading Board Africa for this work that you are doing. Thank you to my fellow panelists. I think this conversation is something that we should continue in terms of ensuring that the board management relationship is managed. It's an ongoing process. We should not tire. There are so many dynamics that come into play, even as we face different emerging issues. You may find that even the board, which was seemingly performing very well and the relationships were good, you might find that when there's a crisis or when there are different emerging issues, things change. So this is a relationship that you have to continue constantly manage. It's not something that you do one off at the start of the tenure of the board. Is something that you have to constantly manage. So it's important that the company secretary, the chairperson, the CEO, I think there's that continuing monitoring of the board management dynamics. I think I'll end here, but also congratulations to Winnie. I didn't get a chance to say my congratulations. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Christabel. I'll now move over to Rita lastly. And Rita, as you give your closing remarks, your parting shots, I'd also request that you address, I think, one of the questions about whether the company secretary can be CEO, and in such an instance, if they can, how would the company secretary be that bridge? Over to you, Rita.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Again, I think I touched on this and said it is with small entities where you would usually find that possibly would happen. I don't know whether the question is whether it is acceptable, because there are requirements for a company secretary that even a CEO you would have to fulfill. But I think we've touched on the fact that the independence question becomes very, very difficult to meet when you have that margin. Governance was designed in such a way that as much as possible, the company secretary is independent. And so if you're running and then you're the conscience of the company, yet you're the one running the organization, that check, there's a problem there with that check. So not advisable, but does happen with smaller entities. And really those that are certifying like in their culture. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think, thank you to the panelists, thank you to the participants. I think as someone who's passionate about governance, one of the things that I like to say is, look, governance is behavioral. At the end of the day, we can put in place processes and frameworks and try to rely on those, but it is behavioral and it is also contextual. You know, depending on the type of organization you have and the culture, you may find that you struggle with even a setup that another organization doesn't struggle with, just because of that context. And I think it's been said, you know, it's to not tire in the effort, and to also remember that the governance, the people who've thought through this and really actually, you know, come to the conclusion that it's behavioral, say it's collaborative. It's not the chair, it's not the company secretary, it is collaborative, and it does take time, as Winnie has said. So keep at it, and do not be afraid once in a while to get the external facilitation you need, because some of the challenges are related to the fact that we are all internal, we are all part of the process. At the end of the day, if you're a board member, please remember, our board should remember that if you do, you cannot check. So if you're the one doing it, how then do you hold management accountable for it? That helps to actually keep us separate. And thank you to leading boards for organizing this, and a good day to everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Rita. I think we've finally come to the close of this. It's been quite an insightful session. I just want to thank you all for the great turn up, for the active participation, the comments, the discussion on the chat, and also via audio. Thank you to the panelists for doing what you do and sharing your knowledge, expertise, and experience with the rest of us. I request that, you know, Raymond has shared a link, I think, for the YouTube channel. I request that you extend your comments there. Leading Boards Africa also has its page on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Feel free to post about how this session has been, your comments on the topic of discussion for today. And of course, to Leading Boards, thank you so much for arranging it. It's a very topical issue. I think there was a lot to learn, and I believe we learned a lot from it. I wish you all a very good morning. Have a good rest of the day and weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for moderating, Stella.
Thank you, Stella.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, Stella, for taking us through, and everybody.